Burn Moses,
Yes, sir.
are you ready for this one?
I don't know. Go.
Do you have your seatbelt on?
Ready to go.
Okay, this is what I'd like to talk about, and you tell me if you have any input here. Christine, my daughter, you know her. She just turned 11. And I think it's time to have the talk. Now, do you know what I'm talking about when I say the talk?
I think I'm beginning to get a drift on it, yeah.
I think what do they call it? The birds and the bees?
Yeah. Which I never bought into when
Is that
I was
right?
a kid, no. They used to talk about the pumpkin patch and, the cabbage patch, and storks and what have you. And I think probably at 6 I was fully conscious of what was going on. Never bought into any of it,
Yeah.
So, sure.
Well, do you think it's important to have the talk with a child?
It's, I never had it, and I believe you said earlier that you never did.
That's right, I didn't.
And I know a lot of people didn't, and some people who did. I've had children that I can remember specifically that we had some serious talks, and others were passive. They didn't seem to be challenged. We were gratified by one thing, that all the kids seemed to be very open about their activities, even to the point we didn't want to know. It was kind of fascinating, they were really open, and whatever caused that. Of course, from the very beginning, we were preparing them to be free. Rather than parenting, we were preparing. This is a big difference in my mind.
Now, that's a good thing, being open.
Oh, I think so.
Would you
of course.
say? I mean, because some people would say, "Oh, don't talk about that."
Oh, that's a major problem.
Open.
A lot of people, some based on religious issues and some just on their own embarrassment, just really get rigid about this sort of stuff. And you have to be open about it, because I think a lot of people are misled because they misunderstand. They're carried forward into some of these things way before they're interested or want to go, but they don't know how to stop it because of the sociology that's involved. That's pretty complex. And yeah, I think it's good to have a real solid talk, because it's helpful, I think, for a child to know where their parents stand and to give them some guidelines. And so, yeah, I think it's important.
Well, I totally agree. So we're going to do it.
Okay.
Well, no, you didn't. You were not given the talk.
No.
Did you know that you weren't given the talk? Did you think
Yeah,
yourself,
I was
hey, why
conscious
aren't they, I know there's something going on. Why is nobody telling me about this?
I was conscious of my parents not getting into it, and I just wrote it off as probably embarrassment on their part. Yeah. I can remember reading books, though, from the time I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I was conscious of, I'm just, it seemed like I was as conscious then as I am now of what's going on. And so, you know what I mean? It just doesn't seem like such a big deal.
I don't know if that's good, Bert.
Yeah.
That you're as conscious. Now, have you given the talk?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So we reared 6 children, have 19 grandkids, so there's some qualification in there, although I was distanced from a lot of my kids from time to time throughout my life. But still, there is an interesting phenomena. This pops into my mind. There's 2 things I'd like to say.
Okay.
You have to be careful in these areas with young kids. I heard a delightful story some time ago where young Johnny comes running in and asks his mom where I came from. He said, "Where did I come from, Mom?"
Right.
And she got a little awkward, and she said, "Well, when your dad gets home, we'll sit down and talk about it." So sure enough, that evening after dinner, they all sat down and they went into all the explicits of sexuality and, the physicalness of it and the drama and what have you. And the kid just sat there, and they said, "Do you have any questions?" He said, "Well, Johnny said that my pal over here said that he came from Chicago. And I was just wondering where I came from." Because he didn't want to hear all that stuff. That was not an issue. You know what I mean?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Where'd I come from? Chicago.
Chicago. But then the other issue is, of course, is being able to communicate about it comfortably. And,
right.
And I think that's terribly important. Oh, I know the issue I wanted to bring up. For whatever reason, a whole accumulation of bits of information and experiences that I watched other people going through. When I was 12 years old, I remember making the commitment that I would be chaste when I was married, regardless of when that was.
Now, do you mean chased by girls?
Yeah, oh, cool. And I was. I was fortunate in that area.
I don't think I've ever heard that. No, I've heard that word chaste,
yeah,
with a T.
But that I would be a virgin when I'm married, that I was not going to participate. And some of the reasoning behind all of that was that it just seemed to me, well, there were several. One, it seemed to me that if I had sexual relations with numbers of girls, that one would stick in your mind. Because I remember reading that whenever you had sex with a girl, that she had a piece of your mind from that point on. There was a memory, an evaluation, something that you weighed everything else against.
And you read that?
Yeah. And and that made sense to me, and it seemed to me that if I had had sex with several women, one would be better than the rest. Like Sonia would be more exciting, more dramatic, more forthcoming than Mabel and Josie or whoever. And so when I finally met the girl that I wanted to have in the rest of my life, if she wasn't as good as Sonia, then I would always be wondering, you know what I mean?
Where's Sonia?
Yeah, where's Sonia? Or how can I get Sonia back?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. May not, but I think it does a lot of times. You know, that curiosity.
Interesting,
yeah. That was one thing. And then when I was right about that age, which might have been the deciding factor, I saw a syphilitic child. And that just put the fear of God in me, boy.
Syphilitic child?
Yeah. You don't.
A child
in other words,
born...
syphilis is not too common today, but it's certainly out there. But this child had been born from a syphilitic parent. And what had happened, and the community kind of knew what had happened, that this couple who'd had 2 other children were separated and about to get a divorce, but it didn't occur. And during the 2 or 3 years of separation, evidently the father had relations with other women and had brought syphilis home to his wife, and then they had this child. And it was, I mean, bordering on monster-like. I mean, really, really totally mentally deficient and misshapen, and I mean, really tragic. And I happened to see the baby one day. We knew there was this mysterious child in this home. You know, in the neighborhood, you have this mystery house.
Sure.
And then one day, we were out playing football in the street, and the mother had this carriage out, and it had always been covered, and a wisp of wind pulled the cover up, and I happened to look in, and I saw this child, and it just really spooked me. And I thought, if promiscuity, if running around can possibly cause that to happen, I just wasn't going to do that. And so when I went in the military, it was easy with all the lectures they gave us. I'd already made up my mind. And indeed, when I married, it was my first relation. And so I've always been pleased about that.
Well, a visual is a real helpful thing to get a point across. And in fact, I'm going to bring that up later. What do you think? I think that I was, preparing for the show. I think it would be helpful to identify whether your child is gay or straight before you have the talk. Because that might alter the verbiage.
Oh, I would think so.
What do you think?
I've been concerned about this because I saw the hostility, the posturing, the attitudes that were conveyed toward gays and what have you. And some of the dearest people in my life are gay, and it's always painful to see people posturing about it and indicting it and what have you. And so I've been very conscious of it for a long time, and I've watched. And there has been, because I'm old enough now to look back and see that I had been suspicious of little children who showed the tendencies for that, and indeed they were gay. In other words, 2- and 3-year-old boys who, because of their manner and what have you, indicated that probably there was something going on there that would probably lead them, or not lead them to it, the fact that they were going to be homosexual. And yeah, I think the talk would be different. But then again, you see, to talk about it openly may reveal something that would save that child's life. Because there's another thing that's happening out here, and I know that it's happening, that a lot of teenagers, a lot of teenage boys and girls are committing suicide because indeed they're homosexual. They're homosexual, and they know it secretly, and yet their parents are posturing about it, and their church is posturing about it, and their friends are joking about it, and they feel totally unacceptable. And I know that that's happening, and there's no question about it.
The talk might be an avenue for that to come out.
Would open it up and look, I love you, and that is not, this is not something. But I can't imagine the pain of a child. Let's face it, we become pretty cognitive at 6 and 7 and 9 and 10 and what have you. Yeah. And if you hear your parents saying that all gays should be dead and that it's, they're unacceptable and all this kind of stuff, and you know that you have a tendency, that must be very painful to endure. To have to keep it secret,
Ooh.
that'd be painful.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, I think the talk, to find out where the stirrings are, the directions that they're taking, and at the same time to be careful, because I think that young people could have stirrings or curiosities at least in either direction. Doesn't mean they're homosexual or they're heterosexual, but
Sure.
they're curious and they're experimenting, and I don't think that's uncommon. You know.
No, yeah, not with kids.
Yeah.
Boy, I think it would take. I know a lot of parents who would not even delve into trying to figure out whether their child was gay or straight. Well, whether the child was gay.
It'd be totally unacceptable. The whole thought. Yeah.
So that would take a lot of guts. But boy, you know, this is great. See, now I have a whole new perspective about the talk.
Oh, really?
So okay, so give me the first 5 minutes. Here you are, 11-year-old girl. First 5 minutes of the talk. She's straight. Okay, you've figured that part out.
You've already determined that?
Well, that's an assumption that we can use.
That's an assumption.
How do you start it?
I think you have to find out where they are. In other words, do you have curiosities? See, if they can be made comfortable with you, and you can say, you can discuss anything you like with me and ask any question, and I'm not going to be embarrassed. And if I am, it's only because I'm practicing this. But this is such an important subject. I want to be able to communicate about it with you. And as time goes on over the years, that conversation should get more and more complex, because it's a complex issue.
Oh, yeah. There really is no one talk, is there?
No. Oh, no.
There's the initial talk, and then it's an evolving thing.
Yeah, you couldn't
But
cover
anyway.
We do know that even at Christine's age, there is a possibility. Let's see, she's 11, she's attractive, she's delightful, she's cute, and she's sensuous. You know, she's a human being.
You didn't have to bring that up.
No, but she's sensuous, you know, and therefore boys who are already beginning to get the stirrings at 12 and 13 might very well find her attractive and want to experiment.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, it might be that, has she encountered that yet? Have any boys, you know, tried to be physical in those ways with her, and, you know, to touch her or to induce her to remove her clothes or anything like that, or just to share the look. You know, I'll show you mine, you show me your type thing.
Yeah.
If that's ever gone through, and try to be it in an unembarrassed way, because these things, they're natural, but they're not sociologically sound. They're frightening, and could be devastating to a person.
Are you saying you think a boy would try to induce a girl to remove her clothes? I can't imagine.
Can't even imagine that.
No, it's crazy. What do you think, Jeff? Okay, so you start by asking questions. Where are you? Where have you ever? Have you been thinking about this? Where are you at this stage of your life as far as sex is concerned?
What books have you read, if any? Right. What have the girls talked about at school? What have you heard at school? Just find out. Just try to communicate about it, and I don't be careful not to take it further than she wants to take it. Not out of embarrassment, but out of curiosity. You know what I mean? In other words, if she's not curious about it yet, just kind of, you know, open the door, and then keep communicating about it.
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying is that, to set up the fact that this is a long discussion, it could take years to really touch on all the issues, because we did a show on this about a year ago. Doesn't seem that long, but it was.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember.
Where we talked about sexology, and it has all these components to it. There's 6 other components, and that's the psychology of sex, the philosophy of sex, the sociology that's involved in sex, the pathology, which is terribly important, the theology. Okay, in other words, I think pathology, theology, and biology. And biology is the first discussion. See, biology is the first discussion. I think sociology follows close behind. Theology certainly would get in there if you're driven in that particular direction, because the church has very specific ideas about it, and, you know, in other words, you have to honor that if that's part of your culture, part of your family. And then as they mature, the philosophy of it and the psychology that's involved. because it's pretty dynamic.
Boy, isn't it though?
See, one of the big
Some
things,
people's whole life is their sex life.
Oh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty dumb. See, the thing that I'm concerned about with girls as much as anything, and with boys, same thing, is expectations from their society, from their peers. It's like
Right.
I have talked to so many young women who have found confidence in me and was able to convey to me that they did not want to have sex, but they were somehow maneuvered into it in order to be socially acceptable.
Right.
In other words, boys said, well, if you loved me, you would do this, or if you want to see me again, you're going to have to do this, otherwise I'll put the word out on you that you're gay. You know what I mean? In other words, they actually manipulate them into these positions, and they have sex and regret it, and actually build a psychological case against it.
Sure.
It's not a pleasant experience anymore. And isn't that tragic? Because it should be pure joy. Should be pure joy. No manipulation, no fear, no agitation in it at all. And yet, I can see where, and a lot of people are maneuvered into that. And with the new mores, the girls wanting to catch up, I know that they have been just as aggressive in many cases as the boys.
Sure.
And
yeah, we don't want to just do a show about talking to a girl, but
Exactly.
that was
Exactly.
the example that I was using. But boy, you hear that story a lot.
See-
Maybe a girl's her first time is when she's drunk.
Oh, yeah.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have kind of a wild theory that I don't know if you call it theory. I'll just tell you, but it's a little strange, and people tell me I'm out of bounds. My experience was that a lot of young girls, when I was young, were not aware that the boy was going to ejaculate and put this juice in them.
Mm-hmm.
They were just clearly not aware about that. And it goes back to the visual you were using before. Did you ever hear the story when somebody's trying to quit smoking, they can't quit smoking, and their friend takes them down to the hospital and shows them a smoker's lung that's been taken out of somebody, and it's in a jar, and they see that, and they never have a cigarette again. They never even want one again.
it had an effect on me.
They had that visual
Yep.
to go with. And because of the mechanics of sex, a young girl usually would never see ejaculation. That's something that's hidden until maybe you get older, and so I had this idea. Okay, you know how you go into the airport and you go through these X-ray machines. You set up some kind of fancy X-ray machine that only can see these juices. So then, the young couple they go and they have sex, and then they have to walk through this machine on the way out. I think Kim is starting to laugh over here. The boy walks through. He's pretty clean, Everybody cleaned up after they were done. And the girl walks through, and the buzzers go off and the bells ring. And then she sees that she's carrying something into that room out of that room that she didn't carry in. And it's the visual. And now I've talked to women about this, and they said, you better let me talk to Christine before you do. You don't want to scare her. But it's the point I'm making. It's the visual that I don't think a lot of young girls have, that visual that they're actually accepting something, a gift, if you will. And I think if they knew that, they were very aware of that, I don't know if they would just readily accept it from anybody that they weren't real crazy about, or they didn't think was just a really great guy.
Yeah, that could have an influence, certainly. They.
What do you think about that? Is that too wild?
No, I don't. I think, though, that you're explaining the same thing. Once you get to the physical explanation of the sexual act, that's going to have to be part of that explanation, because this is what is sex all about from a natural standpoint?
Okay, tell me.
It's about propagation. It's about making babies.
Propagation.
See, in other words, what's happened is that we've talked about this a lot in the past, but everybody out here, whoops, it's not a very good profile.
Do we have one of those fancy overhead cameras?
This is a profile. Yeah.
Boy.
And, we are our minds and our brains. See, all this other protoplasm is limited in its function compared to the brain itself. Too few children are incited, therefore excited, about their minds.
Right.
I mean, there's too much emphasis put on the bodies. The body itself is designed magnificently to perambulate. Remember, we talked about that?
That's right. Perambulate. That's to get us
perambulate
from place to place.
The brain. You can move around, be able to function and do stuff.
Get the brain to where it wants to go.
Right.
Okay.
And then it's to propagate. The body is designed to propagate, which is to create offspring, to make new babies. And the part of the mind that's driven in that direction is the thalamus, and the hypothalamus, the phelinial and reptilian part of the brain. Okay?
Okay.
It doesn't care anything at all about circumstance outside in the world. In other words, the social ramifications, it doesn't care anything about that. It doesn't care about mores, social and sexual mores. In other words, morality, it doesn't care anything about that. It doesn't care about economics, doesn't care about age, doesn't care whether these entities are married, none of that. Okay,
wow.
All it is.
That's scary.
Yes, it's very driven to create new brains. Okay, and it uses the body to do that. How? Well, it meets a member of the opposite sex, and there's a stimulus. Okay, and there's juices that flow all over the body. There's a hormonal impact. Okay, and there's a strong urge to have sex with this other party, with the primary intention to make a baby. That's all that's up to. Okay.
Even though consciously they don't want to make a baby.
Oh, that's a whole different thing.
Right.
Yeah. They consciously don't want to. Now, the tragedy of this is that our love songs, a lot of our love language, like "You belong to me," "Please be mine," "You're the only one," "There's only one for me, and that's you," this kind of stuff. Well, people get caught up in this romance stuff, you know what I mean? And so when those juices flow, they think this must be the one. And it's not. It's just... It's
another
primal.
one.
It's another one, yeah. It's just like, surely we know, if we really were realistic about it, that, we could, if you want to legalize this, I've said before that I could be probably happily married to 20 million women on the planet.
Right.
You know what I mean?
One at a time.
Yeah, not all at once, heaven knows. But yeah, any one of them, because that's about contribution and elevation and making that person happy and communicate and be intimate and this kind of thing, and to have sex, okay? You can do that with a lot of people. But see, the social ramification of that should command what happens, not this rip. See, this happens, of course. In other words, sex occurs, and the way that baby is formulated is that there's a seed. It's like any animal. A seed has to get from the male into the female. Right. And that, because I'm sure you're probably going to talk about erection and ejaculation and all the rest of that stuff.
No, I'm done with all the naughty words. I'm done with the naughty words.
You leave that to me. Okay, but the thing of it is, when that happens, people get pregnant and have a baby, and they call it a miracle. Well, cockroaches do the same thing.
Every day.
See, if Christine puts it in this contents, or any young woman or young man, that cockroaches and rats and gerbils or gerbils, whatever is proper, horses and everything does this.
Right.
We're not special in that regard, but this is a subliminal, phelinial, reptilian-like natural consequence out here, and socially we're not prepared for it. We're not prepared. I don't care how sophisticated we think we are as a society. We really aren't very sophisticated about promiscuity. Right. We make judgments about it, and a huge amount of pain comes from it. One thing that just popped into my mind, that it's more than just the talk. Sometimes I feel that once it's been spoken of, then it becomes a mystery again, and children are left on their own.
You think so?
And it should be a continuing dialogue, a communication, a revelation of experiences, questions, in other words, exhibited feelings, or discussed at least feelings, and so that you can really understand. Now, the thing of it is, you got to arm yourself as the parent with the right kind of information, be comfortable with it.
That's right.
And I can't imagine anything about sex, sexuality, the function, the biology, any of that that would be so overwhelming that a parent couldn't talk about it.
Oh, it's hard though.
However, but it's just kind of like you move into it and you do it, prepare yourself through reading and what have you. But then again, there are some other issues that maybe we can convey here. For example, we can't deny.
We can't.
You cannot deny that if you're talking to a boy or a girl and say, okay, when it comes to sex and how you understand that to be, how would you like to have your mother to have behaved as a young woman, and how would your daughter to behave as a young woman?
Now you're asking the child this.
Okay, yeah.
How would you?
Any one of us for that matter, but
Okay.
certainly in the age of where you're maturing, and these are all experimentations. In other words, in order to find an integrity in this thing somehow, and a nobility, an ethic, if you would, you have to kind of look at this. In other words, everybody, I think, would like to have the thought, at least, that their mother was a virgin. That she was not promiscuous, hadn't
Right.
had half a dozen lovers. Wouldn't you prefer to get that image?
Sure.
And you certainly would want your daughter maybe to find someone special at the right age and marry, and that's the only sexual relationship she ever had, and it was a joyous one. That would be great. You know what I mean? I would think you'd want
Okay.
Wouldn't you want your daughter to, wouldn't that be the ultimate?
Just have one sexual experience in her whole life?
Sure. So
Well,
long
I
as,
don't
so long,
know.
no, maybe it'd be okay to have 100 if every one of them were joy-filled and have no impact on the rest of them.
Certainly,
that's not likely.
Certainly.
Yeah. So I mean,
Yeah.
so you'd want it to be there's a certain purity, a certain
Right.
ethic that you would like to have in there.
Love.
Sure. And so, yeah, a lot of the answers are right in here. Then, how can that be brought about? And this is this is sociology. This is sociology. Now, society has a way of taking its toll on you if you misbehave in this arena. They have names for, when you're outside the marriage, for example. I mean, you're either shacking up. They've got, you know what I mean? In other words, society
Isn't that terrible?
is uncomfortable with that.
Right.
They're uncomfortable with it, and I understand that. We try to get sophisticated about it. People live together and what have you.
Significant others.
Yeah, but people are uncomfortable with that. They just are.
Yeah.
And that has to do with sociology, the psychology, theology, all that creeping in there. Now, some people would say, well, yeah, but gee, if it wasn't for all these barriers and what have you, I think we could all be a lot happier. There is, I think it's the rhesus monkey, if I'm not mistaken, is probably the only animals that they have discovered that are totally promiscuous. They're bisexual. There's no age barriers. There's no activity at all. This
Wow.
just among this particular tribe of monkeys.
I think I saw them today down on the mall.
But anyway, there's no aggressiveness in their culture. In other words, there's no battles, there's no posturing, no wars, and so sex contributes to that certainly. And yet, that's a natural act with them. Societally, you try to get away with that, and you're going to have nothing but chaos. People
boy.
kill over this stuff.
Sure.
Oh,
yeah.
They kill.
It's probably the number one.
Yeah, and they carry hurt and pain forever. And so there's a lot of things to be honored in here. There's no question. And then there's the pathology. I mean, I think every young woman, every young man should be aware of the pathology of sex.
Okay, let's
Well,
talk
the
about
evidence
that.
is pretty clear. Too much research has been done to deny this, that promiscuity leads to a high risk of cervical cancer in women
No kidding.
and prostrate difficulties with men. In other words, at younger ages, okay? Cervical cancer, no, there's a killer factor. Then the pathology of venereal disease. I mean, it's not just AIDS. AIDS is bad, but there is still syphilis, and there is still gonorrhea, and there's still all these other diseases,
Hepatitis
herpes.
and
Yeah,
herpes,
all
yeah.
kinds of things that can diminish a person's life, sex life, and everything else, because that comes out of promiscuity that never occurs, does not occur if two people mature and mate properly. When I say properly, I'm talking about sociologically, theologically
Sure.
sound, okay? So there's a lot to that. There's so much about this that, I mean, you can keep studying this stuff and learn things. I've learned things, for example, about the structure, of the organs and what have you, and their role in sexuality that I didn't know for half a century. So it's so incredibly complex.
I like this mother-daughter thing. See, now that's why you have your own show, because you have a lot of good information.
Well, here's another thing, too, I've done a lot of research. I have asked hundreds of men. I said, okay, let's really get down to the,
the bottom.
Yeah, bottom line here.
Bottom line. Okay.
What are you looking for? When you go out into the world, what are you looking for? You know what I mean? And most men are looking for the woman who won't have sex with them, okay? Not who never will,
sure,
but they're looking for the woman who won't.
Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with that when they hear this.
Oh, I know.
But I know what you're talking about. There's that thing.
They're going to try every one of them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, they're going to try every single one of them, but they're looking for the woman who won't, and that's the one who intrigues, and that's the one they begin to build a future about. Okay? Women, I think, have really diminished their role societally by being so accepting sexually, because they've lost a lot of their natural posturing power. And not that it's manipulative and what have you, but we have someone in our life, an intimate friend, who, a very attractive woman, and there's not going to be any sex until they're married. None, okay? And she's incredibly attractive, you know what I mean, and deserves courtship, and she knows that. And the thing of it is, it's a theological thing, but it's also satisfied sociologically, pathologically, all the other ologies. See, the church wasn't too far off when they began to create some of these dogma, about this sort of thing, because they were looking at the consequence. In other words, the disease and the pain and the aggravation that comes out of taking liberty with these things. Pretty tricky.
You're talking about the commandments.
Yeah.
The dogma.
Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not covet the other man's wife, and whatever. So those kind of things, they had some sound footing when they did that. I mentioned earlier that I was 12 when I made my commitment, and how I was going to conduct myself sexually in my life. I didn't have the privilege, after he was about 6, of raising one of my sons, Rex. He was kind of out of my life for a long time. And looking back on it in a conversation we had when we did get back together, and at 12 years old, without my influence, he had made the same decision. I found that fascinating. And he's a great dad, and, one marriage, and this thing's going to last, and he's going to have his grandchildren, and it's going to be the ultimate classic case of family. Okay, very family oriented. And it's wonderful to see that. It's wonderful to see.
Now, why do we hold that so high? You hear the Jimmy Stewart. Didn't he have a wife, and they were married for 200 years, and everybody looks at that toward, boy, that's what I want.
It's a sociological reality that people just honor that. Oftentimes they can't capture it for themselves, and there's a lot of pain involved in it.
Could it be based on fear?
What do you mean?
Fear of going against the religion, going against society, going against...
Well, when that occurs,
right.
Some of it, but some of it too is out of commitment, which really frees us up from a lot of foolishness. It's another thing too.
Right.
When you're going into a relationship with somebody, it's going to be a marriage, if you would, or you're going to commit yourself to someone. There's another little guideline that I carried around in my mind for a long time, that I wasn't going to have sex with someone until I reached a point where in that relationship, okay, due to illness or whatever, that that the occasion arose where I could never have sex again, that I wouldn't abandon the relationship. You know what I'm saying? In other words, that should not be the foundation of the relationship, in other words. It should be part of the joy of the relationship, but not the foundation of it. And so, again, that would give someone pause.
Wow, yeah,
because if I could never have sex with this person, would I remain in a relationship? I'm thinking, for example, when I speak of that Christopher Reeves, Superman,
right?
Okay, and was his wife, from all appearances, was committed to him, okay, and will spend her life with him, whether they can have sex or not, or whatever form that might take. She's going to be with him. And I think people honor that. They celebrate it. You hear people celebrating it and admiring it. And now we're talking ideal. Sometimes you can make commitments. Like I made a commitment in my mind that when I married, it would be forever. The other person didn't do that. And so by modern law and what have you, there was a divorce, and You know, if there had been a separation and no divorce, I would have remained chaste. Okay, as long as I was married, I would have remained chaste. I would not have stepped outside that marriage bond. I know that in my mind.
Right.
Would not have done that. But then when she went ahead and got a divorce, in a year or two, or I think it was a couple of years, when I found someone, fell in love again, created a new family. Okay, but it wasn't. That's not the way, the ideal that I would have orchestrated for my life. You know.
Right.
And yet you made the second one as noble as you could, and so on. So.
When you were talking about making that commitment to somebody, and the understanding that if we, for some reason, could never have sex anymore, I would stay with this person.
Right.
And this is kind of a roundabout way of going to it. But back to the talk with the young child, self-exploration.
How did you make that segue?
Wasn't it clean? It was just clean.
Yeah.
Because that's a big part of the sex life.
Okay.
And that's probably what would occur if your mate was injured or somehow couldn't have sex anymore. You'd probably be relying on yourself. You either have to leave them or rely on yourself to, I don't know, relieve yourself, or however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, what do you think about bringing that up to a child? Bringing up the whole, the concept of that, and how would you explain that?
I don't think you probably would need to, because it in all probability will occur anyway. It's just the idea that you don't want to add any shame to it. It's kind of like, I can imagine a parent saying, now don't you do this. This is bad, this is naughty, this is wrong.
You go blind?
Yeah, and they're going to do it anyway. And so now guilt begins to really get in there and can influence an ultimate relationship. You know what I'm saying? You can't say that self-exploration, experimentation, and what have you is wrong, because they're going to do it.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying everybody does, but I'm saying that the probability is incredibly high. That's as natural as breathing. Okay. Now, the thing of it is, it's satisfying. Remember we talked earlier about the id, that subconscious mind? See, the reason that masturbation can fill this void is that this part of the mind doesn't know the difference between a real situation and a synthetic one. Right. And in the conscious fantasy of a young boy, for example, who is masturbating and then has an ejaculation, this part of that mind is satisfied.
Right.
Because it has done what it needs to do to propagate. Okay? And so, indeed, understand what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
And the same thing would probably be true of the female. No, well, I'm sure it is.
Can I take this picture with me when I go to have the talk? This could be very...
Oh, sure.
Yeah, no, I'm following you.
Yeah, so it doesn't know the difference.
Yeah. Huh.
Fascinating.
That is. Yeah, I never even thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
That your body thinks it's propagating.
Yes.
And it's not doing that at all, is it?
Now, that's another thing, too. What happens with a lot of, the middle age crisis. What happens in the mind is that the possibility of offspring, of continuing to propagate, begins to get narrowed, okay, to a man in his 40s, 45, 50 years old. And oftentimes, they'll come out and they will have affairs and run around and what have you. This is a product of that subconscious mind, that need to propagate, the need to survive, to continue, to actualize. And unless this conscious mind has within it a conscience that's developed by honoring the sociology and the theology and the psychology of sex, will become promiscuous probably. See what I'm saying?
Right.
It has to do with the subconscious mind and its need to propagate. Okay.
So if your conscience doesn't keep you on the straight and narrow,
right,
and then your conscious mind backs up your conscious by keeping you out of the bars and away from the
choices you
people, then you will probably do that.
Exactly.
Because you want to keep propagating.
Exactly.
Boy, that's scary.
You want the younger female, obviously. In other words, this is natural. You want the young, the healthy female to propagate with.
Right.
Okay. Now the same thing with the female. See, there's been a long time where they felt that, for example, there was a lot of animal cultures, like birds especially, what have you. They felt they were monogamous. Okay. In other words, they had one relationship. Okay. And they find that a lot of the females, in order to have healthy offspring, will cheat on their mates. They've been finding more and more of that.
Is that right?
The female, once it gets to a certain age, wants the younger male, okay, in order to have healthy offspring, subconsciously. Now, we socialize that, okay, and we call it boy toy and, you know, what is it, the candy gals and stuff like that. But
Sugar.
the fact of the matter is, a lot of that is being influenced by a subconscious mind that doesn't know from anything socially, or psychologically, or theologically,
and you
or
can see it too.
Yeah.
You can see when somebody's running around doing that, you can just see it in their face almost, that they're not conscious, they're not using their conscience in making these decisions. Yeah.
That's another thing that can happen too. People can't understand how a man can love his wife and still be promiscuous. Well, of course he can. I mean, because you love at a sociological level.
Boy, it's tough.
I mean, love is not sex. So you can love your wife and love your family and still be driven, okay, on a natural basis to propagate with a sensuous or a young female.
Right.
So I have known men who dearly loved their wives, who cheated and would just die if they lost their family. You know, they'd be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But somehow or other, they're able to do that in their, you know, in other words, their conscious mind is not committed, okay, to this thing, and then they cheat.
And their husband or wife, whoever's doing the cheating, this is the word, it's always kind of interesting when they're able to forgive. And I think what they're doing is they're understanding this.
They
that they
understand
were
this.
just, maybe they don't understand, it was the hypothalamus and propagation, but they're understanding that they just went out there for
After a
primitive
while,
reason.
After a while, then pathology begins to creep in there. Now the arguments, all these other arguments we're speaking of, begins to creep in, and the separation can occur.
Right.
In other words, you can only tolerate so much of that because of the chance for disease, the chance for, you know, I mean, the humiliation. Other people knowing, you know what I mean, that this is going on is a sociological impact that a lot of people can't endure.
Boy, there must have just been a crazy... Now, when was penicillin brought in? There must have just been a crazy sexual party going on when that arrived, huh?
I mean, after that?
Yeah.
It gave, there was a lot of liberties taken after that. They
Sure.
thought everything was okay. But then other diseases kind of reared their ugly heads, you know. But a lot of very famous people died of syphilis. Napoleon was one, and I think there's a whole list of them.
People in the old days, they were
So
dying.
it's pretty common. This has always been a problem because people haven't understood the relationship between their conscious and their subconscious mind. See, a lot of people are subject to a subconscious mind that is not very intelligent. You know what I mean? It just wants its own way all the time. And until that relationship is clear and the person assumes authority for the direction their life is taking consciously, then there can be all kinds of chaos. But every social crisis, everything that goes on that's inappropriate can be solved understanding that relationship.
That's right.
That's why the life formula is so dynamic, coupled with command commission and some of these things. When people understand this, Matters of Confidence is one of those essays that gives people the tools where they can begin to take command of the direction their life is taking and avoid a lot of this foolishness and pain. Just avoid a lot of it.
And we have to tell our audience, come and see the life formula. It'll be the greatest show you've ever seen because it's absolutely true. It gives you this foundation of understanding the mind, the trichotomous nature of the mind, and the role of the hypothalamus. It's once you get that, once you're aware of that,
it solves everything.
Things like sex and of course all the other aspects of our life become so much clearer. It's just it's wonderful.
They, I think that. Somehow, some way, we can get that word out to more and more people. It'll catch on after a while. And it's so simple, and yet for some reason has not been identified clearly.
But there's one more thing that I want to talk about. We talk about the ancient Greeks identified 3 different types of love. Is that the right verbiage? And having the talk, to me, is really, it was eros, which is a kind of possessive-based love, philos, which is a love that's based on reciprocity. You help me, I'll help you, and I'll love you, you love me. And then agape is just, I just plain love you, I love everybody. It's just, it's love, it's like God.
Yeah, it's a volitional commitment to care about people.
That's right. And
Where does monogamy? Where do you which of those types of love do you think? Anyway, I guess the point I'm trying to make is it seems like monogamy is very eros. It's like possessive.
Yeah, no question.
And
it's all three. Now, a monogamous relationship would be you're mine, I'm yours. Okay. Possessive and surrendering to that, and reciprocal. In other words, I'll do this, you do that. That'd be there. Too often doesn't have nearly enough agape in it. But if the agape emerges in there and gets developed, then the eros philos diminishes, and you've got an relationship instead of a relationship.
Relationship.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Oh,
I want an
everybody wants an relationship.
Yeah,
sure.
I'm going to go buy one. Do
Yeah.
I have time?
If you could sell them in CD, they'd all have one.
You could get it on the net.
That's for sure.
Anyway, I know that kind of went off the track, but I was thinking about it in the car today.
But it's part of the talk.
It is.
I think that would be part of the
about
talk.
agape,
To
okay.
understand what love is, because our love songs, our love language misleads.
And you cannot separate love from sex. I mean, you have to separate love from sex.
If you mix them up, you ruin both.
Right.
It's just the way, you ruin both.